Welcome to Construction Genius. If you're following along with the show, you know that we had an episode 207 back in January of 2023 with Ryan Gorel on mergers and acquisitions. And that's the consultant's perspective, which is often very helpful. But today we get the insider's perspective from my guest, Jim Kaloutas. And Kaloutas is a commercial painting contractor that has grown through acquisitions, 6 in the last 8 years, to incorporate industrial flooring and fireproofing into the organization. And so today we come from the contractor's perspective, talking about how to go through a successful acquisition. The great thing about Jim is that he is very clear on what he's looking for when purchasing a company. We talk about the importance of nailing the culture, a transference of skill, and having an internal champion in your organization so that you can go through the process of an acquisition successfully. We begin at the very beginning when Jim started his business as a young man when he was just 19 with his father and grew through those initial learning and growing pains. And it's really interesting when you think about the history of his company and how that history has then affected the way he goes through the acquisition process. So you'll want to listen very carefully to some of the key aspects of the history and how that has influenced Jim as he has grown the business. So this is the insider's view of acquisitions. We're not talking about theory, we're talking about practice. So if you're thinking about acquisitions as a way of growing your business, this is the episode you need to listen to. I want to thank Jim for joining me. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please share it with anyone that you think would benefit from listening to the show. And of course, as always, give us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. Let's dive into the interview. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Jim, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric.
It's my pleasure to have you on the show. I know a few weeks ago I had a business broker on who specializes in acquisitions, and it made me want to talk to someone who actually owns businesses and does the acquiring. And I know, Jim, that's one thing that you've done to grow your business. So I'd like to ask you, what is your approach to acquisitions? Tell us a little bit about your business and your approach to acquisitions.
Sure. I think to really look back in my history is I started from nothing, went to college for a month, dropped out. So acquisitions for me is really about people. And my approach, I think I tripped over acquisitions, and all my acquisitions have been introduced to me by my employees, by my vendors, and we found a way to make it work and found the chemistry to work. And really, it's been about bringing people together and then growing the organization either in geography or adding additional services to what we do.
And tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Commercial painting contractor, industrial flooring contractor, and a fireproofing contractor. And we actually grew into those services in that order.
Okay, so painting, flooring, and then fireproofing, and all in the commercial field, so to speak.
Correct. 2 typical customers that we go to are large commercial general contractors and facility managers operating their buildings.
So let's just go back to the beginning a little bit. You said you spent a little bit of time in college. It didn't work for you. Why didn't college work for you?
Coming out of high school, I think I've surfed my way through it, not literally, but I got by. And I wasn't prepared. I wasn't disciplined to be able to do the work when it came down to college. I've always had the curiosity. I loved learning. So the learning continued after I dropped out of college, but it just came up in different ways.
Were your parents disappointed that you dropped out of college?
I would say they were. I would say even some of my neighbors were disappointed. I was dealing with a little bit of that. I immigrated here from Greece. So being part of an immigrant family, my sister actually helped with my college applications. She was probably a little bit more disappointed than my parents.
Interesting. So then you dropped out of college. What did you do the next day after you dropped out of college?
My dad got me a job, so I continued working, but it wasn't long after that I started taking classes at a local construction college at Wentworth in Boston. So I started taking night classes and plugging away and learning things in a different way.
Why did you go into the construction college specifically?
I think growing up in the industry, for me, my dad worked for my uncle who had a union painting company. So I had grown up in construction. I had been around it. So it was just natural for me to go there. I probably thinking about it, I probably should have gone right to Wentworth right out of high school, but I didn't know any better. And I went into electrical engineering. So maybe I was a little over my head, but I figured it out.
Interesting. Okay, so you go to the construction college, and were you going there specifically to come back and help out with the painting business that was already established in your family, or what was your perspective there?
Now, Dad was a union painter at the time, and where my uncle had stopped doing the union painting, my dad went right out of the union hall. So Dad always got laid off, and I always did side work with Dad. And being immigrants, I always spoke a little bit better English than my dad. So that's really where I started to learn the transaction of the business, because my dad always did side work, but it was me that wanted to turn it into a business.
Okay, so give me a little bit more. You're a young man. I'm assuming, early 20s at this point?
19.
19, 20. What did you learn about selling construction services right at the beginning?
I think reading people, and it was in my early years that I realized that some people liked my dad and I doing the work for them because they appreciated the quality, the hard work, and the effort that we put into it. And then what I realized that some people hired us because we were very inexpensive. And it was interesting for me to realize as we raised our prices and as we grew the company, because we started to develop some overhead, that a lot of those customers that wanted us just for cheap price went away. And that was a good thing. And I didn't realize it till after.
How did you feel when you first started raising your prices?
That's one of the hardest things as a business owner, is to understand the value of that. And so I was very nervous, very uncomfortable doing it, but I got used to it. It evolved, and I realized that that was very important, because for me, as I raised my prices, I got better employees. And when I got better employees, I could actually get better customers. So those two things kept growing for me: better employees, better customers. And it was most important to keep raising my prices to afford those better employees and better customers.
See, that's an interesting perspective there, because sometimes when we think of raising our prices, we just think of it purely, man, I need to make some more money. But I think that's interesting that you saw the correlation there between getting better employees and therefore getting better customers, and being able to raise your prices then to get the employees and also then to get the customers. Was that raising the prices, was that like a filtering mechanism where you began to filter out like the B and the C clients and could focus more on the higher end clients?
Absolutely. I think for me, actually, it started to shape what a good customer looked like. And I always talk about the 1.0, the 2.0, the 3.0. And for me, I'm probably up to my fourth or fifth generation of, call it, employee and customer. Because again, it's evolved. And when I think I'm done, I find another way of looking at an employee or a customer.
Okay, so let's discuss that. That's really interesting. So you've got your 1.0, your 2.0. So tell us if you can remember, or if comes to mind, when you think of employee 1.0 and customer 1.0, give us a brief description of that.
Sure. Employee 1.0, literally, I would go pick them up from their home, put them in my vehicle, drive them to work, feed them lunch, and then hope that they would come in the next day, and then just keep trying to find more people like that. I probably have hired most of my friends in some way, shape, or form. So I've had to grow through that. A 1.0, as far as a customer in the early days, the local paint store would give my dad leads, and we would go and we would either small property managers, small residential projects, and they always had someone cheaper. Ultimately, back then, we were the cheapest ones, and we were undercutting other people, and not knowing that we were doing that is what was happening.
Okay, so how did you feel when you were in the 1.0 phase?
I didn't really know I was there until I went to the 2.0 phase, or until I realized that I needed to make more money, or I was frustrated that all the effort and the work that I was doing in my business, and it really wasn't doing much for me. And I could go get a job somewhere else and I could make more money than if I added up all the level of effort that I put into it. So it was really about hitting the wall for me, and then getting frustrated, and then realizing I needed to do something. And then pricing was one of those things that I needed to raise. And then I watched the things happen.
Okay, so you hit that wall. Why did you not go and get because you've got an expensive job at the beginning of 1.0, right? And it's all on your shoulders. And so many people hit that entrepreneurial wall and decide, dude, forget this. I'm going to go work for somebody else. What made you stick it out working for yourself?
Pig-headed determination is probably the best thing for me. I think that's one of the things, as I'm reflecting of myself and my growth, there's a lot of determination, and failure was not an option, because the early days of being in business, at least the first 5 years, I was providing job security for my dad. and my dad would be laid off from the painters union. So failure was not an option. And it was that supplemental work that 8 to 10 months out of the year, my dad would work in the painters union, but then in the afternoons would come work with me. And then when he would be laid off, we would be there all day long together. So that was call it my late teens, early 20s.
Did you enjoy working with your dad?
Very much so. I think back, and my dad is still with us, and he's 92 next month.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, a lot of quality time together, a lot of learning and growing, and loved it.
How did your dad as a father handle working for his son?
It was interesting because there was something about my dad that in the early days when we worked together, when we did side work, he never kept the money and paid me. What he always did was we would actually pay all our materials, pay all of our employees, then he and I would split what was left over. And one of the things that my dad did is he never wanted to take advantage of me, because he would tell me the stories of all these other immigrant families that would have the kids go work, but then collect all the money from the kids. So for him, it was a lot of pride for him not to take advantage of me as a child. But the thing for me, what I learned was the transaction. And at a very early age, I got to see jobs that he and I did together, and we made no money. Our employees made more money than we did. So for me, learning that transaction early on established something for me.
Interesting. Okay, so you're at the 2.0 stage. You're raising your prices. You're attracting better employees, attracting better clients. What was the next stage in the development of the organization?
Looking for some type of more than one transaction, more winter work, and being able to keep more people busy. And I remember going to repainting condominiums or looking to work for like a property manager that always had repaints. So it was looking for a little bit more steadiness rather than the one-off job. So looking for a little bit more length to a relationship. So maybe that was part of it, was seeing that there would be more of a relationship and there was a continuous flow of work rather than needing to reinvent it one transaction at a time.
Okay, so I'm out in California, and you know us Californians, if it drops below 50, we start fussing and crying. You're out there in New England, and so the weather's a little bit different. How did the realities of weather drive your acquisition over the years? I mean, you have painting, which outside, obviously, but also inside. Then you have your flooring and your fire divisions or companies. Did that have any influence at all on that approach?
So, yeah, the acquisitions came much later, but if you think about it, when we're painting, most of our stuff is inside, and it's changed a lot. And I think the evolution for me was going from a residential exterior painting contractor to actually thinking about commercial work, and that made a big difference. When it came to the acquisition, I think what I learned from my first acquisition was the industrial flooring. We're working in a facility, and we've had painters and floor installers in this facility for the last 9 years, year round. And we have anywhere from 2 to 8 people in this one facility that we first started this industrial flooring with, and they work year round. So I think it created some longer, and that would probably be customer 3 or 4.0, that here you are, you're providing these services inside of a facility year round, multiple services, and you're just moving around their 1 million square foot facility from project to project to project.
That's beautiful. I want to go back a little bit more. You started residential. What made you go into commercial?
I think growth was always inside of me, and I always wanted to do more and grow. So the whole aspect of learning business and trying to understand business, that drove me as well. And it was just like the natural progression of like, hey, let's go into this. Let's go work for a contractor. I remember like my first year of business, I had to get insurance by the end of that year because we got referred to a contractor, and that made a big difference. And that turned into recurring revenue. So contractors for us, or even the commercial work, that was much bigger projects, working year round. If contractors are not building, then they don't have any work. So for us, is like they're always building, they're always renovating, and they just turned into a steady stream of work for us.
Okay. So then take us from 2.0 to 3.0. What did the customer and the employee 3.0 look like?
Relationship business, you're working with them to provide some type of a solution to what they have going on. So there's a lot of collaboration. And same thing on the employee. The employee is looking for benefits, steady work, year-round work. I'm not hiring seasonal people anymore. I'm hiring people that want to work with me, is because I'm providing benefits, I'm providing year-round work. So it's a much better employee and it's a much better relationship on the customer side.
Okay. So that idea of the relationships, when did you make the shift from being sort of the entrepreneur who's just always saying yes, 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 to the entrepreneur who's being more picky and is willing to say no? Because I think there's a lot of power for us in entrepreneurship as we build our businesses to be willing and able to say no.
Sure. A lot of my learning and education came out of my desire to learn and grow. And I was lucky enough to trip over the Entrepreneurs Organization. And I got into a peer group and I started to learn from my peers that were in different businesses. But what I learned was there's business is business. There's 12 problems and we continually repeat them at different levels. So I started to learn and look at that. How do I make it recurring? How do I grow it? So there was a lot of learning, a lot of reading. I remember reading the book Good to Great, another great, because the basic business fundamentals, I chose to apply those to a painting company. I chose to apply those to a subcontracting business. And that's really how I learned, was find a way to apply basic business principles to what I do.
What is the one or two business principles? So you talked about 12 of them, but what's one or two of them that you consistently apply that you get the most leverage from?
Investing in myself, investing in my people, always that whole growth mentality. And I know I'm not giving you principles because the 12 principles, I just use that as a round number to tell you that.
It's okay. No, yeah. Just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the relationship, at the end of the day, we're in it for the long haul. And the people that I'm working with today, I worked with them. I could go back and I have relationships that go back 30 years. And these are some of the principles that my parents taught me of, like, you just do right by people, you look out for people, and because it's the right thing to do. And what I tripped over that was that I realized that people appreciate that and respect that. And that's grown into relationships that I'm still working with people over 30 years now.
Now, when you say investing in your people, what do you mean by that?
So early days would probably just sending them to seminars, bringing in some type of coach or a speaker, having them have their own coaches, signing them up for Vistage or other peer groups themselves. I've paid for employees to go get their MBAs, whatever it takes. And probably in the last 10 years was my choice to build a management team, because up until that point, I was just making my own decisions on the fly.
How do you measure success in terms of the investment that you make in people? Because sometimes what happens is companies, they throw money at, let's say, bringing in someone who does leadership development or something like that. They hope for massive change. Massive change doesn't happen, or maybe it's a little tick for a minute and then it goes back to regular or performance. How do you measure that success?
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to the individuals and being able to not want the growth or not want the investment in them for them more than they do. And for me, it's really about trying to find the right people that are willing to do something with the investment. We have invested in things that they learned it for that split second, then it went backwards. For me, it's always been about you're investing for the present day of how are you going to apply what you just learned, and making sure we're always talking about that. And then there's other things that people need to be learning and growing, like they're marinating themselves to be ready for the future as well. So there has to be a healthy balance in both. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the individual person and their core. Are they really passionate about growth? Do they want to learn and grow? Do they have that curiosity? And trying to look for that in individuals.
I think it's a fallacy, but one of the fallacies that I hear in business is people are reluctant to invest in their people because what happens if I spend all this money training them and developing them and then the competition just takes them away? Is that something you struggle with at all, or do you just don't worry about that?
I don't worry about it. I've heard all those fallacies, and You just have to be doing it, because the risk of not doing it is to be surrounded by people that just, you're making all the decisions for them. That's exhausting.
Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying my discussion with Jim. I know I am, and learning a ton. And speaking of learning a ton, I have a book. It's called Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. So if you're going through one of these acquisitions and you're bringing people on board, you need to be able to develop them. You need to be able to up-level their game, make sure they're making a contribution to your organization. And this is one resource, this book here, that can really help you. And let me tell you what some of the folks are doing who purchased this book. I was chatting with a guy yesterday, actually, in a large GC. Their goal is to grow their business to over $1 billion in revenue in the next few years. And they have a book club. So what they're doing is they're going through Construction Genius. There's 12 chapters in the book. They're reading 4 chapters a month. And the book is pretty short, as you can see. So 4 chapters is not a lot. And what they're doing is then having a book club discussion for an hour every month on the information in the book. So this is what you do. You go out to Amazon. There's a link in the show notes. You buy a copy of this book for all of the people in your organization. The soft cover here is $20. You can also get Audible or the hardcover version. And then you do a book club in your organization, where you read a few chapters a month, have an hour-long discussion, talk about how you're going to use it and apply it in your organization, and then you can mine the information in here to help your leadership team excel. So go out to Amazon, grab yourself a copy of the book, and now back to my interview with Jim. And you make a really good distinction here, and it's one that's challenging between the sort of, I like the marinating idea. People need to marinate on things, and what they learn or what they first get exposed to today may not be used for many years. And then you've also got the immediate application. Can you give me an example of sort of the marinating strategy? Like, what kind of stuff are you doing to develop your people that you know isn't going to make an immediate impact, but will in the future?
For me, a current example would be our CFO. She just signed up for the Vistage Key Person Group, and she's going to be going through that. And at the end of the day, there'll be some things that she learns, but it won't be until after she's had 24, 36 meetings that she's built enough references to be able to understand other people's businesses and how they would apply, rather than she might be taking a CFO boot camp, and that will apply to something that she'll get value out of right away. An analysis of how to do an analysis on the numbers and statistics, that would be value that you would get right away.
Yeah, that's interesting because you just described it very well there. It takes time to build those hooks in people's minds so that when they're in one of those peer groups, they can then begin to translate what other peers are saying from different industries into their industry and see the application of what they're doing and how it might help them.
Correct.
Okay, so going back now, this idea of you've got 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then you mentioned 4.0 in terms of employees and customers. What distinguishes the 4.0 from the 3.0?
I think from an employee perspective, the 4.0 in my mind would be someone looking at a career path for them, thinking about what they could be. And I think being 36 years in business, I can now look and show people examples of people's career paths. And now we can start to build models around that and structure around that. A lot of the training that we do with our field, we have a tendency to say, here's the career path. Here's where you could start in the field, and then you're going to end up going in one direction into operations or another direction into sales. And your knowledge of painting, flooring, or fireproofing would help you in either operations or in sales. And both those career tracks I've watched people both of those career tracks.
So that idea of career pathing, which I think is tremendously important for any organization, is that something you stumbled upon? Is that something you thought about at a beginning time? Or did it just occur to you one day, you know what, I need to be able to articulate clearly to people where they are, where they're going, and what they need to do to get there?
For me, it came out of doing a field leadership program that we realized that we needed more foremen to be able to run our projects. And the only way that we're really going to get more foremen is to actually build the field managers that would actually grow them. So we established a field leadership program. And in that field leadership program, we realized, oh my God, here's the steps that some of these field leaders have taken. Let's start sharing it, because let's give them the vision. Let's give them the why. And that's really where it came out of some initial training that we did, and everybody latched onto it.
I'm thinking of a number of my clients who have tremendously talented people in their organizations, and there's only so many seats in the organization at the executive level for people to matriculate into. How did that kind of thinking influence your acquisition strategy in terms of creating opportunities for people who may not have them if you just remained the kind of company that you were before you began acquisitions? Did I make that a clear question?
You were thinking exactly what I was thinking, because you have people, and ultimately, if you cap your growth, these people will say, hey, look, I have to move on because there's no more opportunity for me. And my view was I needed to always be growing myself, because if I wasn't a leader that was thinking about a bigger future, then everybody that's on my team, with my team, they might grow right past me. And that's okay if they do, and they should move on and go work somewhere else if I'm not providing them that opportunity. But for me, I've always had that passion for growth, that I'm always looking for those opportunities. Either it's through growing top line, or is it by improving internal systems? It can always be both. But that's, as I tripped over those acquisition opportunities, it did create more opportunities for more people. We never had HR before. We never had a CFO. We never had a COO. We never had project executives. We just had individual PMs. So for us, all of that acquisition and growth that we did helped us establish even bigger career paths for some of the employees on the overhead side.
Can you give us an example of a time where you had someone who was very talented, but they were not a fit in your organization, and over time you came to realize that and you had to move them on from your organization?
So you're saying I'm moving them on because of a poor culture fit, or I'm moving them on because I don't have an opportunity for them?
I'm thinking more along the lines of culture fit.
Sure. I think from a culture fit perspective, we've had a lot of great people work for us over the years, and it pains you because sometimes people have spent 10, 15 years with you. But at the end of the day, for me, it was about doing what's right for that individual. So we've had some conversations with them about what's working, what's not working, and to share the pain. So that way, when we did finally get to that point, it wasn't something that we thought about on a Monday and then delivered it to them on a Friday. For us, it's really because people are at the core of who we are. It painstakingly, we worked with them to help them in some way, shape, or form, but ultimately realized that it wasn't a good fit. And we just had to have that difficult conversation, and they got it. They understood it. We had enough difficult conversations leading up to that point. So we had it, we parted ways, and we still talk.
It's interesting because when I'm working with my clients, many times the biggest challenge that someone in your position has is letting go of talented people who aren't a culture fit. And they just drag it out. And ultimately, they do have to let them go. Is that something you found to be a challenge in your career? And if so, how have you been able to deal with that?
Yeah, dealing with people is always a difficult thing. When you have someone that is a high performer and then you have to come up, even consider parting ways with them is painful and difficult. I remember early on in developing our company values, I remember the coach that I had at the time, one of the things he shared was the importance, you have the right value, that you're willing to let someone go that's a high performer that is not meeting. And that's when you have some real stickiness to your values. So that lived with me. And this is going back 20 years ago, that learning of the importance of that stickiness and not to ruin the company and to protect the company, that person has to move on, even if it's painful. And that's when you're doing right by the company, is that you're doing right by that individual to just move them on.
Yeah, I just want to make a note of that for everyone who's listening. If you, as the CEO of your organization, can do exactly what Jim just described, your company is going to be way more healthy and way more successful. So I appreciate you breaking that down, Jim. And it's interesting, we began our conversation here with acquisitions, but we spent a lot of time talking about building your business and establishing the culture and growing the company. So how has that, the way that you've built the initial business from 1.0 to 4.0, how has that affected your acquisition strategy as your business has developed?
So as we're growing the overhead, it has helped us to put people in places to help us do the roll-up. But the way for us is the acquisition. The only reason the acquisition works for us is that the companies that we're merging with, they have a similar culture. Their people are aligned. They know how to take care of their people, and that's made it real easy. All the other stuff we'll figure out. They typically don't have the systems we have. Most of the acquisitions that we've done have been relatively small compared to us. But one of the things that most of the owners, and I would say almost all the owners that we've acquired, have stayed and worked with us. We actually embrace it and like that because it's part of their stickiness. It's part of their future. But it's interesting, after every person that we acquired, within 6 months or a year, they take a long vacation that they haven't been able to take in probably God only knows how long as a business owner. And I think that's really the biggest thing for them is to be a part of something bigger, to do the things that they love and not being held down by the things that they couldn't stand doing. Some of the acquisitions that we've done over the years, they hated doing operations. They hated doing billing. They hated doing sales. And each one, it's been different. So it was interesting. We supported them in the things that they didn't like to do. And it was like a 1 + 1 = 3. And it was just, most of them, we literally would double within the first year.
Was that a conscious strategy to go after companies that were smaller than you in revenue in terms of the acquisition? Or was there a proportion you were looking at, a ratio of your size to their size? Was that conscious or did it just occur?
Yeah, nothing was conscious. Everything was by accident. I think we tripped over these acquisitions and we just happened to go forward with them, and we learned and we grew from each one. Again, doing 6 of them, I've learned something different after each one, whether it's about customers, whether it's about people. The first one we did, we added a service. So we had to learn a whole new service.
What did you add? Tell us what you added first.
We added the industrial flooring. So the first acquisition we did, we added industrial flooring, and we had to learn a whole nother industry. It was similar because we were used to dealing with epoxy coatings on walls, and we've done an occasional epoxy floor, but this took it to a whole nother level with epoxy mortars, urethane cements. And it turns into like a science experiment. And we were doing science by mixing chemicals and apply them to concrete floors.
Were you in a secure enough financial position? Because when you start saying experiments and all that kind of stuff, I start thinking of money being spent. Were you in this sort of secure financial position to be able to take on that additional cost of learning the business that you acquired?
So we've always felt that it was important to have a strong balance sheet. We came out of the Great Recession in an okay spot, and we went through it because we had a strong balance sheet. So we were in a strong balance sheet situation. And going into industrial flooring is nothing like painting, because if you mess up a paint job, you can touch it up and you can fix it. You mess up an epoxy floor, you are redoing it all over again from scratch. And the costs don't, turn into another 10%. It's really another 100%. And when we first took it on, we were messing up 1 out of every 4 floors. So there was a huge expense of learning at the beginning to really embrace it. But we were fortunate with the business owner that sold us the business. He was like a professor. He really knew this stuff, and he helped us through it to be able to really get it. And I think well said from your perspective is you need some money behind you to be able to figure out, because I had a lot of blind spots of what was going to work and what wasn't going to work.
So you talk about not having like this grand acquisition strategy, and you kind of tripped over some of them. But sometimes when we trip, we just kind of pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and keep on walking and miss the opportunity. What made you think, maybe this is something that we should pursue as far as the acquisition is concerned?
I think seeing it helping us grow our talent pool, one of the bigger values to doing acquisitions, and I think most people don't even think of it because they think of EBITDA, they think of profit. For me, the biggest positive that we got out of acquisitions are these craftspeople that have been working for these companies for 20, 30 years. You can't buy those people. They will never come to work for you. But when you do an acquisition, you get these talented people that you've never seen before, and you couldn't even imagine the quality of workmanship that these people do. That was probably the biggest gold that we found in our acquisitions that we never realized was there.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So I'm working for the acquiring company, the person who's being acquired. Let's just say I've been there 20 years and I'm a high performer. And all of a sudden, here comes Jim and his commercial painting company buying this industrial flooring. I mean, who's this guy? What do you do, Jim, to reassure me day one when the acquisition has taken place that there's a place for me in the company and this is a place that I want to stay?
So in the first couple acquisitions, the most important thing that I found is I need to meet you personally. I need to shake your hand. I need to know your name, and I need to learn a little bit something about you. And for me, that was the most important thing, because just to connect at the human level, because we're people working with people. And I think sometimes people take that for granted and don't realize that people are not numbers. People are people. And the only reason people are doing what they do at work is because of what's at home, right? Their family, their personal life. So for me, I just connect with that. As I started to learn more about that aspect of it, what I found myself doing, because there was always a mismatch in benefits. So one of the things that I found myself doing, because there's always going to be, we'll try to like level up the benefits to make sure they're as good as the people that we're acquiring. But the next thing I did is every employee to the acquiring company, I would give you 1 week paycheck right up front and just say, thank you for coming on board, plain and simple. And it's just my token to tell you, I'm going to mess up. I'm not going to get everything perfect, but you matter to me. So I'm going to write you a check up front for 1 week's pay as soon as I buy the company.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, this idea of people working, and then behind that, they have the motive for working, which, as you described it, is something other than that, which might be their families and things like that. How have you as an entrepreneur, as you're describing your journey here, I mean, I know there's a ton of hard work behind it. How have you as an entrepreneur balanced your home and your work life over the years?
I think I'm fortunate that I did not meet my wife until I was in my late 30s. I think I burnt through a lot of girlfriends because there was a lot of effort and work in the business in the early days. So I don't believe there is ever a balance because you have to do whatever it takes to make sure that it works and that there is pain, there is strain there on both sides. And again, if you're not providing for the family, then you're going to have other pressure and stress. But yeah. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
No, you are. So there's an interesting insight there, is that you didn't actually get married until a little later in life. And that was because of the energy and effort that was going into building the company early in life.
Well, some people would tell me that I didn't meet my wife yet and it was the love of my life and that's why I didn't do it. But I would say that my priorities were different in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. But it's just interesting because you made the point well that there are sacrifices that people have to make. And I think it's important as we're considering the choices that we make in our lives to balance, to count the costs, so to speak. If I've committed to doing this business building, am I really in a place in my life where I should get into a committed relationship at this point? Or is that something that I need to wait until I have a little more stability from not stability, but a little less need for the intensity on the work side so that I can pay the attention to the home side that is required?
And is there a committed enough relationship to taking on the business that would work? So it could go that way. You could have, I know there are a lot of business owners that have unbelievable support from the home front, and they met a person that is super supportive to be able to help with the business and with the family. So I've seen both fronts.
Yeah, and so that's another interesting point, is we're stating the obvious here, but you've got to be on the same page with your spouse, with your partner, about what your relationship is going to look like, what the expectations are for the way that life is going to go. And of course, the support there is absolutely essential.
Well said.
Okay, so going back to this idea of acquisitions, you've gone through 6 in the last 8 years, is that right? Okay, so you've got some calluses, you've got some scars, you've got some wins. What do you think are some details that people miss when they're considering an acquisition?
A lot of times what I've seen is assuming that the systems or the people that I was acquiring were doing a lot of the similar things that I was doing. And one of the biggest surprises that I've had in all the acquisitions that I've done, and granted, the acquisitions that I've done have been somewhere between 1 and 3 million in sales, each of the acquisitions, but none of them were doing job costing. And for me, I learned that lesson of job costing 5 years into the business and not understanding that and having my hat handed to me and understanding what that meant and starting to take control of the business. So I'm just surprised by how many business owners are driving their business without job costing. So that was one of the bigger surprises for us.
Yeah, so it kind of reminds me of those remodeling shows, when they buy the house and it looks awesome and they knock down the first wall and all of a sudden there's the termites and everything like that. Other than the job costing, what was the biggest surprise to you? Can you give us an example of one of the biggest surprises that kind of shocked you after you had purchased the business? And perhaps one that you then learned, because of that, you learned to look for that when you were doing another acquisition.
The thing that also surprised me was probably that not everybody can sell the service, and there is a much higher education that I needed to do of our existing people in order to sell that service. So for me, it was really around the epoxy flooring, and for us to be able to sell the services, there was a lot of education that needed to go in. So it wasn't as much as about the company that I acquired. It was more around the surprise of us thinking it would be easy to sell that service. And the biggest frustration was that our salespeople were selling services that wasn't right for the customer. So when operations went out there, we needed to redo the system to make sure it was the right system for the customer. And that would always cost us more money. And it was the right thing for the customer. So then we went back upstream to increase the education of the salespeople, eliminate some people that shouldn't be selling floors, and working through that was probably the bigger surprise of how much harder it would be to sell that service.
That's a very good answer. I appreciate that. That is really good. Thank you. Okay, so from your perspective as someone who has acquired a number of businesses over the years, what does a business need to do to make itself attractive to a buyer?
Their finances, their books, they should know their books. Their books should run clean. In being able to do monthly financial statements, close their books every month, because the more financial understanding you have of your own business, it's just cleaner. Your performance will go up anyway. So invest in yourself to understanding your finances. If you can take it to the level that you can do job costing, that's wonderful. But know your income statement every month, know your balance sheet, separate out personal items. One of the things that I do on a regular basis is I use my American Express stuff on personal items. But on the receipt, once I'm done doing it, I'll write on it JJK personal or JJK loan. And my accounting department knows when they see that receipt coming in from American Express and Jim wrote on it JJK loan, that's something that he personally charged to himself. And then I pay the company back for that. So if you can keep your books clean, if you can separate out your personal stuff, it's always a much better thing to the acquirer.
Excellent. Thank you. So have you ever been in a situation where you've looked at an acquisition, your emotions have gotten you're excited about the acquisition, and you've had to check yourself because it wasn't the right fit for your organization?
Multiple times, because as an entrepreneur, I get excited about the opportunity. For me, it's probably been around looking at other services, adding other services, and I need to be very, very selective to make sure that the added service complements what we do. And that's probably the biggest thing for me, is to be able to say no. I've said no. Someone said, hey, you're in construction, you do this stuff. How about buying a plumbing company? And I know I could run it, but it isn't a nice complement to what we do. Just recently, we had someone inquire about us buying a casework company. This is a company that we're working with alongside on every construction site, because they're making all the cabinets or the casework that's being installed in these labs and these buildings. And it's just not a good fit, because they're manufacturing something in a shop and then installing it out in the field. There's no transfer of the skills on our employees. One of the things where we're doing the epoxy floors and the fireproofing and the painting, our employees, I would say a good 20% of them will actually bounce around amongst all the trades, because their skills are transferable. So having those transferable trades skills helps in the acquisitions.
Okay, so from what you've said so far, one of the keys is obviously the culture. That seems to be the primary one when you're doing an acquisition. Is that correct?
Yes.
The second one then is some degree of transference of skill. So you're just going slightly to the right or to the left. You're not going all the way over to an entirely new industry that there's no transference. Are there any other parameters that you set in your mind up front going into looking and considering an acquisition?
The other thing that's important for us is to have someone internally that would help run it or lead it. And if there isn't someone from the mothership, then we've actually slowed down some of our acquisitions because we didn't have a person to run it. We didn't have someone that could take it on or lead it. And that was always important for us.
I love that. Okay, so culture, number one. I'm not necessarily prioritizing this, but transfer of skill, and then that internal champion, someone who can run the business right out of the gate. Did I hear that correctly?
Spot on. Thank you for developing my structure for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's what I do. Okay, so just as we're wrapping up, Jim, I think this is tremendous. And feel free to summarize anything that you've shared so far. Let's say I've reached the point in my business where I have perhaps a whole bunch of up-and-comers. I'm thinking about growing the business. I want to be able to do an acquisition. I maybe have a juicy target. What are 2 or 3 things I need to consider prior to making an acquisition, prior to getting into that whole conversation and decision-making process?
Right from the top is get to know them as people. Would you like working with this person and establishing with this person that you're looking to acquire, like what would success look like 3 years from now. So if I was sitting down across the table from you and you and I were celebrating, we've been doing this for 3 years, to make sure that you're aligned with that. One of the early consultants that I had, he shared with me, he's like, Jim, there is no taking advantage of the person. There is no, how do you negotiate something in your favor? Because if you do, and it's not in the other person's favor, it's going to show up later, and it's going to be like that pebble in the shoe. And for me, I got that early on because it's part of who I am as a person, to always do right by people. And that was probably at the core, is making sure that you could see yourself working with this person. You have some alignment on the culture and how you handle people and how you take care of people.
I think it's interesting, though, because it sounds like with all of your acquisitions, the people that you've acquired or the owners of the company have stayed with your business for a period of time. Is that right?
Every person that we've acquired has stayed with us for a period of time, some short, some long.
Okay, so then last question here. Have you ever had a challenge with, because I don't know about you, but I have my own business because, dude, it's my gig. And so I might have an ego challenge if someone acquired me coming into the business. How have you managed that ego issue, if there ever has been one, when you're bringing people who have owned their own business into the mothership, so to speak?
That's been one of my biggest surprises, is that most of these people have checked their ego. And I also have an ego, but for me, I know how to also check my ego to what's for the better of the whole. But my bigger surprise is that a lot of these people who are driving their own bus, running their own business, have just checked their ego and say, yeah, Jim, whatever you want. And I've been super surprised. And I don't know if I've just I got lucky with really gracious people, but that's been my biggest surprise.
What do you do to check your ego?
Checking my ego for me is really realizing that it's not about me and it's about something bigger, and always getting grounded in the why, what's at stake for me. And the organization is way more important than me. So being able to park myself, my feelings and that stuff. And I don't know, it's been because of maturity or because I've been humbled over the years because of all the bumps in the road, but it's really not about me. And I'm sure my wife have kids have been gracious enough to let me know that it's not about me as well.
Right on. At the end of your career, what legacy would you like to leave?
Sure. I think making an impact in the construction industry of, like, you can take care of your employees and have a successful construction business is probably the biggest thing for me. I've seen enough family businesses, enough construction businesses run in a way that takes advantage of people. And it's just one of those things that I am all about, looking out for people and creating something bigger than me that's really about the people.
Tremendous. Last question. We need a restaurant recommendation in the greater Boston area. And I know we had talked earlier, it sounds like you got a couple of recommendations for us. So please, if we're visiting Boston, where do we need to go?
So I have 2 considerations for you. You have Frank's in Beverly, Massachusetts, which is true farm to table, really nice food. You can't go wrong with anything on their menu. The other one would be the New Deal Deli in Revere, Massachusetts, which really some of the cold cuts and cheeses that they have in there, you'll never find anywhere else. And if you want a true Italian sandwich, that's the place you would go.
You said Frank's, right? In Beverly, Massachusetts, and then the New Deal Deli in Riviera, Massachusetts?
Revere, Massachusetts, correct.
Awesome. Jim, you've been very generous with your time here. Thank you for joining us on Construction Genius. I really appreciate the insights that you shared with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, this is Eric. Thank you for listening to my interview with Jim. And I know you enjoyed it because I did. It was a great interview. Feel free to check out those restaurant recommendations, Frank's, and also the New Deal Deli there if you're ever in the Boston area. And I just want you to take time to consider the advice that Jim gave in terms of those acquisitions. Think about how you might be able to grow your business that way. And if you ever need some help putting together a strategy for acquisitions and you need an outside sounding board, contact me on my website, constructiongenius.com. It's an aspect of my business that I help my clients with, thinking through those strategic type decisions. And I'd be happy to discuss with you if or how I can help you. Of course, if you are the owner of a construction company, those are the clients that I work with. And so feel free to reach out to me. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius today, and I'll catch you on the next episode.